Stop whining. It's already sold. My son's voice was flat, dismissive, like he was talking about a broken toaster instead of his dead father's watch. I froze at the sink, soap still on my hands. Henry's coffee mug slipped from my grip. It cracked against the counter. The silence after the shatter felt louder than the words themselves. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I am 73 years old. I buried my husband 6 months ago. His name was Henry Ward. We were married for 43 years. He was an accountant. I managed a bank. We knew how to count things. Money, years, promises kept. Henry wore a Rolex every single day. He wound it at dawn. Always beside his coffee. Always the same quiet ritual. It wasn't about showing off. It was about time. About keeping it. Jason is my son. He is 42. 6 months after the funeral, he walked into my kitchen. His wife Brianna came with him. Heels clicking on my tile floor. Perfume too heavy for morning. They moved through my house like they owned it. Jason looked at me. He told me the watch was gone. Sold, he said, to a pawn shop. I asked him why. He said I was clinging to junk. He said I needed to let go. Brianna smiled. She touched my shoulder. Her nails were painted red. She told me grief makes people fragile. She told me they were helping me. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I stood at the sink. Soap still on my hands. Henry's mug lay broken in 2 pieces. Jason kept talking. He told me about their vacation. First-class tickets. Resort upgrades. They paid with the money from the watch. He said it like I should be happy for them. Brianna told me I was too emotional. Too unable to handle things alone. She said they were worried about me. I looked at her smile. It didn't reach her eyes. I looked at my son. He wouldn't look back. They left 20 minutes later. The house felt cold after. I picked up the pieces of Henry's mug. I threw them away. Then I sat at the kitchen table. 40 years as a bank manager taught me something. Numbers don't lie. People do. I thought about the watch. Henry's hands. The way he wound it every morning. I thought about Jason. About the way he looked at me. Like I was inventory. I got my purse. I got my keys. I drove to the pawn shop that same afternoon. My hands didn't shake. My eyes stayed dry. The shop was on 10th Street. Narrow, dark windows. A bell rang when I pushed the door open. The owner's name was Marco. Heavy man. Kind eyes. I told him about the Rolex. I told him my son sold it. Marco sighed before I finished. He said someone bought it yesterday. Paid cash. Asked strange questions. Questions about what might be hidden inside. Then Marco reached under the counter. He pulled out a small envelope. He said they found it when they cleaned the watch case. The envelope had my name on it. Henry's handwriting. I opened it at the counter. My fingers steady. Inside was a folded note. A date written at the top. June 7th. Our first summer dance. The night we met. Below the date was a string of numbers and letters. It looked like a code. Like something that belonged in a vault. Not on a wrist. I thanked Marco. I left. I drove home the long way. Past the park where Henry proposed. Past the bank where I worked for 30 years. I thought about betrayal. It tastes like pennies. Metallic. Sharp. But sometimes it tastes like something else. Opportunity. That night I sat at Henry's desk. I spread out 40 years of bank statements. Tax returns. Investment files. The desk lamp threw yellow light across the papers. I stopped looking for exact matches. I started thinking like Henry. He built systems. He loved codes. He planned for edges. The string of letters and numbers split itself in my mind. Client prefix. City marker. Our anniversary. My initials. I found an old investment account login. The kind that looks bland on purpose. I typed in the code from the envelope. The screen blinked green. Valid account. The password wasn't my birthday. It was June 7th. The night Henry said he chose me. The night he put in every corny toast for 40 years. I typed it in. The account opened. I couldn't breathe. Just under $3 million. Compounding. Growing. Hidden like a storm cloud. I sat back in Henry's chair. Anger came first. Hot and clean. Then it cooled. I scrolled through the history. Small deposits. Regular. Careful. Then sudden withdrawals in Henry's final year. He sold properties. Liquidated assets. Every sale went to the same buyer. Ward Capital LLC. Jason's company. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not grief. Something sharper. I called my nephew Nate the next morning. He works in real estate. He knows the market. I asked him about Ward Capital. Nate went quiet for a moment. Then he said Jason's company was buying up homes. Cash deals. Shell companies. He said it didn't smell right. I thanked him. I hung up. I went back to Henry's desk. I pulled open the bottom drawer. There was a file folder I'd never seen before. Inside was a report. Typed. Professional. The name at the top said Victor Lamb. Private investigator. I read every page. Gambling debts. Tens of thousands. Maybe more. Predatory loans. Interest rates that destroy people. Inquiries about power of attorney. Plans to have me declared incompetent. Henry had known. He'd known everything. And he'd been building something. A trap. A shield. A plan. He'd hidden the pieces where only I could find them. I closed the file. I looked at the broken mug still in the trash. I thought about Jason's voice. About Brianna's smile. I thought about the watch. Henry wound it every morning beside his coffee. He kept time. He kept promises. And he'd kept me safe. Even after he was gone. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Jason came back 3 days later. Brianna came with him. Again. They didn't knock. They walked in like the house was already theirs. I was sitting at the kitchen table. Drinking tea. The same table where I'd eaten breakfast with Henry for 43 years. Jason pulled out a chair. He sat down without being invited. Brianna stood behind him, her hand on his shoulder. Like they'd rehearsed it. Jason told me he was concerned. He said I seemed confused lately. Forgetful. He said grief was affecting my judgment. Brianna nodded, her face painted with worry that looked practiced. She told me they wanted to help with paperwork. She said managing money was complicated. Too much for me to handle alone. I sipped my tea. I didn't speak. Jason leaned forward, his elbows on Henry's table. He told me they'd found a wonderful assisted living place. He said it had gardens, activities, people my age. He said I'd be happier there. Brianna smiled. She told me they'd already toured it. She said they could handle selling the house. Managing my accounts. She said it would be easier for everyone. I set down my teacup. The ceramic clicked against the saucer. I looked at my son. His eyes were hungry, impatient. I told them I'd found something. An investment account. Small. Nothing substantial. I said Henry's old firm was reviewing it for me. The performance cracked. Jason's spine straightened. His shoulders tensed. He asked what kind of account. Brianna's hand tightened on his shoulder, her nails digging in. She asked if I'd found any numbers, any codes. I let the silence stretch. I watched them, the way their faces changed. Concern sliding into something sharper, greedier. Jason leaned closer, too eager now. He told me I shouldn't make any decisions alone. He said I should share account information with him. He said it was for my own protection. Brianna's voice grew harder, less sweet. She told me that hiding assets could cause legal problems. She said families needed to be transparent. She said refusing help looked suspicious. I picked up my teacup again. I took another sip. Then I mentioned Ward Capital. Just the name, nothing more. The color drained from Jason's face. Brianna's mask fell, just for a second. But I saw it. I told them I knew about the properties, the cash deals, the shell companies. I said Victor's name, the private investigator. I said I'd read his report. The gambling debts, the predatory loans, the lawyers Jason had consulted about power of attorney, the nursing home whispers he'd seeded with neighbors. Jason's hands shook. He pressed them flat on the table. Brianna's jaw clenched. Her smile was gone completely now. She told me I was being paranoid. She said I was confused, imagining things. She told me this was exactly why I needed help. Jason said this wasn't over. He said it like a threat, like habit. But his voice had lost its certainty. They left. The door slammed behind them. I sat at the table. I finished my tea. The house was quiet. Henry's kind of quiet. The next morning, 2 attorneys arrived. A man and a woman. Expensive suits. Polished shoes. They introduced themselves at my doorstep. Karen Blake and Andrew Cho. Their cards were heavy stock. They told me they represented my family's interests. They said Jason was worried about my well-being. They pulled out forms. Power of attorney documents. They said it was standard. Just a precaution. They told me signing would protect me. Karen's voice was smooth, practiced. She said competency evaluations could be difficult, embarrassing. She said it would be easier if I cooperated now. Andrew smiled. He told me they could handle everything. He said I wouldn't have to worry about bills, decisions, stress. They slid the papers across my threshold. I looked at the forms. At their signatures already waiting. I looked at their faces. Professional, patient, predatory. I told them I needed time to think. Karen's smile tightened. She said time was a factor. Andrew mentioned how quickly competency petitions could be filed. He said courts took elder welfare very seriously. I remembered Henry's face, the way he looked when the car broke down. He never panicked. He just fixed the next bolt. Then the next. I thanked them for their time. I closed the door. The lock clicked. Solid. Final. I went to Henry's desk. I opened the bottom drawer again. I pulled out Victor Lamb's card. I dialed his number. My fingers steady. He answered on the second ring. I told him it was time. I told him I was ready to use everything Henry had left me. Victor's voice was calm, professional. He said he'd been waiting for my call. He said Henry had prepared for this exact moment. He told me to come to his office tomorrow morning. He said to bring the envelope from the watch. He said to bring Henry's letter. He told me not to worry. He said the plan was already built. We just needed to execute it. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, Henry's side still empty. I thought about Jason as a boy. The way he'd climb into my lap. The way he'd laugh. I thought about the man who'd sat at my table. The stranger who wore my son's face. I thought about Brianna's practiced concern, Karen's smooth threats. I thought about Henry, his quiet planning, his careful protection. The watch sat on my nightstand, ticking in the darkness. I reached for it. I held it in my palm. The weight felt like a promise, like Henry's hand in mine. I closed my eyes. I didn't pray. I made a decision instead. Tomorrow I would walk into Victor's office. Tomorrow I would pick up the weapons Henry had forged. Tomorrow I would fight back. Not with tears, not with pleading, with evidence, with law, with the truth. Henry had built the trap. I would spring it. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Victor Lamb's office was on the 3rd floor. Old building. Wooden stairs that creaked under my feet. The hallway smelled like coffee and old paper. His door had frosted glass. His name painted in black letters. I knocked. He opened it immediately, like he'd been waiting. Victor was younger than I expected. Maybe 50, gray at the temples. He wore reading glasses on a chain. His handshake was firm. The office felt like a courtroom without a judge. Mahogany desk. Filing cabinets lining the walls. Labels on everything. A coffee machine humming in the corner. Patient. Steady. Victor pulled out a chair for me. He poured coffee without asking. Black. The way I take it. He sat across from me. He opened a thick binder. He told me Henry had hired him 4 years ago. He said Henry suspected Jason was in trouble. He said Henry wanted protection. Documentation. Evidence. Victor turned pages. Each one labeled. Dated. Organized. Bank statements showing Jason's gambling losses. Thousands every month. Recordings made in Henry's house. Legal. Time-stamped. Photographs outside estate law firms. Jason meeting with attorneys. A map of shell companies. Ward Capital at the center. Spreading like a web. Victor explained Henry's strategy. He said Henry had mirrored every property Jason bragged about buying. Ghost investments Jason couldn't touch. Couldn't claim. He said Henry let Jason's greed pull the rope tight. Let him brag. Let him plan. Let him record himself. I looked at the evidence. Page after page. 2 years of work. My hands didn't shake. They rested flat on the desk. Victor pulled out an envelope. Sealed. My name in Henry's writing. He told me Henry left this letter a week before he died. Before the heart attack. Before I became alone. I opened it. The paper felt thin. Fragile. Henry's words were careful. Precise. Like him. He wrote that the money came from his father. Seed money. Grown carefully. Saved for emergencies. He wrote that the emergency now wore our son's face. He said he'd watched Jason change. Become someone else. Someone who saw me as an obstacle. An asset. A problem. He said he couldn't stop it. Couldn't fix it. But he could build walls. Leave weapons. Prepare the battlefield. He wrote that he trusted me to know when. To know how. He said I was stronger than I believed. He said he loved me. The letter ended with instructions. Clear. Simple. I folded it. I put it back in the envelope. I looked at Victor. I asked him what happened next. He told me he'd file with agencies that don't negotiate. Elder abuse. Financial exploitation. Fraud. He said the evidence was overwhelming. Irrefutable. He said Jason's attorneys couldn't argue with recordings. With bank records. He said it would move fast once it started. I signed authorization forms. My signature steady. Victor made copies. He filed them in labeled folders. He told me to go home. To act normal. He said the next 48 hours would be quiet. Then everything would happen at once. I stood to leave. Victor stood too. He told me Henry had been a good man. He said good men prepare for the worst while hoping for better. He said Henry had done both. I thanked him. I walked to the door. Then Victor said one more thing. He said someone else had been waiting to see me. The door to the back office opened. A man stepped out. Tall. Gray hair cut military short. He wore a dark suit. His shoes were polished to mirrors. He carried a small velvet box. Victor introduced him. Samuel Ortiz, retired U.S. Marshal. Samuel shook my hand. His grip was careful, respectful. He told me Henry had hired him years ago. A simple job. Shadow the Rolex if it ever surfaced. He said he'd been watching the pawn shops. The estate sales. Waiting. When Marco listed the watch, Samuel bought it. Cash. No questions. Same day. He opened the velvet box. Henry's Rolex. The crystal catching the light. I reached for it. My fingers trembled now. Samuel placed it in my palm. The weight felt like coming home. He told me there was something else. He turned the watch over. He pressed a spot on the backplate. Something clicked. Soft. Hidden. A second compartment opened. Inside was a micro SD card. Smaller than my fingernail. Samuel explained what was on it. 18 months of recordings. Audio. Video. Jason and Brianna in my kitchen. Planning. Scheming. Practicing lines about temporary guardianship. Pricing my furniture like they were running a yard sale. Messages with offshore bookies. Screenshots of gambling apps. Balances that only went one direction. Down. Emails to lawyers. Asking about quick paths to control elder assets. Everything. Documented. Dated. Saved. Samuel handed me another envelope. He said it was Henry's final instructions. I opened it standing there. Victor and Samuel watching. The title read Ellen's Protection Plan. I scanned the pages. My breath caught. If Jason filed a competency challenge, the plan activated automatically. Ward Capital's assets would transfer to a children's hospital under Jason's name, pinning everything to him personally. The debts would stay his. The court costs would stay his. It was ruthless. It was legal. It was devastating. Henry had built a bomb. He'd given me the trigger. I looked at Victor. At Samuel. I asked them if this would work. Victor said it already was working. We just had to let it unfold. Samuel said Henry had spent 3 years building this protection. He said Henry had loved me enough to become strategic. To think like the enemy. To plan for the unthinkable. I closed the envelope. I held the watch against my chest. I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not hope. Not relief. Command. Henry hadn't just left me money. He'd left me a weapon. A shield. A plan. He'd left me power. I thanked them both. My voice didn't break. I walked out of that office. The stairs didn't creak as loud going down. The morning light felt sharper. Cleaner. I drove home. I put the watch on my wrist. I wound it. Like Henry did. Every morning. Beside his coffee. The rhythm felt right. Familiar. I sat at the kitchen table. I thought about Jason. About Brianna. About their lawyers. I thought about their plans. Their greed. Their certainty. They thought I was alone. Confused. Fragile. They thought wrong. Henry had built the trap. Victor had filed the papers. Samuel had recovered the evidence. Now I just had to wait. Wait for them to step exactly where Henry knew they would. The watch ticked on my wrist. Steady. Patient. Relentless. just like the man who'd worn it for 43 years. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. 2 days passed. Quiet days. Empty days. I cleaned the house. I watered Henry's roses. I waited. The watch ticked on my wrist. Constant. Steady. On the third morning, I woke to the sound of engines. Heavy engines. Multiple vehicles. I went to the window. I pulled back the curtain. Dawn was just breaking. The sky still gray. Dark SUVs lined the street. 4 of them, maybe 5. Men in windbreakers moved toward Jason's house. Federal agents. I could tell by the way they walked. Purpose in every step. Authority in every gesture. I poured coffee. I sat by the window. I watched them carry out boxes. Towers of paper. Computer equipment. Jason's front door stood open. Lights blazing inside. Neighbors appeared on porches, watching, whispering. Mrs. Patterson across the street. Phone pressed to her ear. The same woman who'd stopped talking to me 3 months ago. The same woman who believed Brianna's rumors about my confusion. I sipped my coffee. I didn't look away. The agents worked for 2 hours. Methodical. Thorough. They loaded everything into the vehicles. Then they drove away. One by one. Jason's house looked hollow. Violated. The front door closed. But the damage was done. My phone rang 30 minutes later. Jason's name on the screen. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered. His voice was stripped. Raw. Desperate. He told me I'd made a terrible mistake. He said I was overreacting. Misunderstanding everything. He said he'd only been trying to protect the family. I listened. I didn't interrupt. Brianna shrieked in the background. Legal words I barely understood. Something about harassment. Something about elder manipulation. She was trying to flip the script. Make herself the victim. Jason kept talking, his words tumbling over each other. He said the investigation was nothing. A misunderstanding. He said his lawyers would clear everything up. He said I needed to call them off. I set down my coffee cup. I told him I hadn't called anyone on. I told him the investigation wasn't mine. It was his. He asked what I meant. His voice cracking. I used the tone I'd used at the bank. Facts. Sequence. Totals. I told him about the gambling debts. The exact amounts. I told him about the forged affidavits. The ones seeking guardianship. I told him about the recordings. His voice in my kitchen. Planning. Scheming. Joking about nursing homes. I told him about Ward Capital. The shell companies. The property ladder. The one that climbed nowhere. That collapsed into nothing. Jason went silent. The kind of silence that admits everything. I told him Henry had heard every plan. Every conversation. Every cruel calculation. I said Henry answered with evidence instead of anger. With documentation instead of arguments. Jason asked how much Henry had hidden. I didn't give him a number. I gave him a rule instead. I told him Henry left enough that I would never need mercy. Not from people who measured love in invoices. Not from people who saw me as inventory. Jason's breathing was ragged, uneven. He asked what I wanted from him. I told him I wanted nothing. I said the investigators would want plenty. But not me. I said I was done. Then I hung up. My hand was steady. The phone didn't shake. I looked out the window again. Mrs. Patterson stood on her porch, still watching Jason's house. Her phone was down now. Her face uncertain. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. A text message. From Mrs. Patterson. She said she was sorry. She said she'd believed things that weren't true. She said Brianna had seemed so concerned. So convincing. She said she should have asked me directly. I read the message twice. I didn't respond immediately. I thought about the months of silence. The avoided eye contact. The way she'd crossed the street when she saw me coming. Smear campaigns always sound like concern. They sound like worry, like care. Until someone turns on the lights. I texted back. I told her I understood. I told her people believe what sounds reasonable. I didn't say I forgave her. Not yet. But I didn't say I wouldn't. That afternoon, Victor called. He said the agencies were moving fast. Faster than expected. He said Jason's financial records were worse than Henry documented. Offshore accounts. Hidden debts. Fabricated income. He said Brianna was already negotiating. Trying to separate herself. Saving herself first. Like always. Victor said the house might be seized. The cars. The investments. Everything Jason built on borrowed money and stolen time. He asked if I was prepared for what came next. I told him I'd been preparing since the watch disappeared. Since my son looked at me like I was an obstacle. Since Brianna smiled and called me fragile. Victor said the criminal filings would come within days. Civil suits would follow. Restitution demands. Asset freezes. He said it would be public. Visible. Messy. He asked if I wanted my name kept out of it. I thought about that. About hiding. About shame. I told him no. I said my name could stay exactly where it belonged. I said I wasn't hiding. I hadn't done anything wrong. Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he said Henry would be proud. I told him Henry had been proud already. That's why he'd built this. Why he'd planned everything. Why he'd left me the tools to fight back. We hung up. I sat at the kitchen table again. The same table where Jason and Brianna had performed concern. Where they'd planned my future without asking me. Where they'd measured my worth in property values. I touched the watch on my wrist. The metal was warm. Warm from my pulse. From my life still beating. I thought about Henry. About his quiet mornings. His careful planning. I thought about how love doesn't always look like roses. Sometimes it looks like binders. Like recordings. Like evidence. Sometimes it looks like a watch with two hidden compartments. One for remembering. One for fighting back. The evening news played on the television. I wasn't watching. But I heard the anchor mention local fraud investigations. Real estate schemes. Elder financial abuse. They didn't use names. Not yet. But everyone in our zip code would know. They always do. I made dinner. Just for myself. Soup from a can. I ate at the table. Henry's chair still empty across from me. But it didn't feel as empty as before. It felt like he was there. Still planning. Still protecting. Still keeping time. The watch ticked through the silence. I finished eating. I washed the dishes. I dried them. I put them away. Then I sat on the porch. The evening air was cool. Across the street, Jason's house was dark. All the lights off. No cars in the driveway. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel revenge. I felt something simpler. Safety. For the first time in months, I felt safe. Not because Jason was gone. But because I had fought back. Because Henry had loved me enough to prepare for war. Because I wasn't alone. Even now. Even without him. The watch kept ticking. The sun kept setting. And I sat there. Steady. Still standing. Still here. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Victor called again the next morning. He told me to come to his office. He said Samuel would be there. He said there was something else I needed to see. I drove downtown. The streets were busy. Normal. People going to work, getting coffee, living their lives. Nobody knew what was happening in mine. I climbed the creaking stairs. Victor's door was open. Samuel stood by the window. He nodded when I entered. Victor had files spread across his desk. More than before. He told me to sit. He poured coffee, his movements careful. He said the second compartment in the watch had more than recordings. He said there were folders, documents, a complete archive. Samuel handed me a tablet. The screen glowed blue. He pressed play on a video file. My kitchen appeared. The angle from above the refrigerator. Hidden camera. Tiny. Invisible unless you knew where to look. Brianna was sitting at my table. Jason beside her. The timestamp read 3 months ago. Before the watch disappeared. Brianna was coaching Jason. Her voice sharp. Impatient. She told him to practice looking worried. To soften his voice. She told him phrases to use. Temporary guardianship. Cognitive decline. She told him to mention confusion. Memory problems. Safety concerns. Jason repeated the words. Like an actor rehearsing lines. He stumbled. She corrected him. He tried again. They laughed about it. About how easy it would be. Brianna said elderly people always trust their children. She said courts always side with family who show concern. Jason asked about the house. About selling it. Brianna pulled out her phone. She showed him furniture prices. Estate sale values. Like they were planning a yard sale. Like my life was inventory to liquidate. The video ended. Samuel played another. Different day. Same kitchen. Same 2 people. Jason was on his phone. Showing Brianna something. Gambling app. The screen showed red numbers. Losses mounting. Brianna's face tightened. She told him he needed to move faster. She said the debts were becoming dangerous. Unmanageable. She said they needed control of my accounts. Soon. Jason said his mother was stubborn. That she wouldn't cooperate. Brianna said cooperation wasn't necessary. Just leverage. She said they'd already talked to lawyers about competency petitions. She said once they filed, everything would accelerate. She said nursing homes would simplify everything. Make access easier. Jason nodded. He looked relieved. Like she'd solved his problem. The video ended. My hands were folded in my lap. They weren't shaking. They were very still. Samuel showed me more files. Emails. Text messages. Communications with offshore bookies. Balances that spiraled downward. 40,000 lost in March. 60,000 in April. By June, Jason owed $170,000. To people who don't negotiate. Who don't forgive. Victor explained Henry's strategy. His counter-move. Every property Jason claimed to buy through Ward Capital, Henry investigated. Shell companies. Fabricated deals. Money laundering dressed as investment. Henry had documented everything. Built a parallel file. Then he'd contacted the authorities. Quietly. Methodically. He'd given them evidence. Let them build their case. He'd died before seeing it complete. But he'd lit the fuse. Victor said the investigation had been running for 18 months. Longer than I knew. Longer than Jason suspected. The agencies had been watching. Waiting. Gathering. Henry's evidence had given them the foundation. The roadmap. Samuel pulled out another envelope. Thicker than the others. He said it was Henry's final contingency plan. The one titled Ellen's Protection Plan. I'd seen the summary before. But not the details. Samuel spread the pages across the desk. If Jason filed a competency challenge, automatic transfers would trigger. Ward Capital's remaining assets would move to Children's Memorial Hospital under Jason's name, as a charitable donation. Tax documents already prepared. Signatures waiting. The debts would stay attached to Jason. Personally. Legally. Court costs. Legal fees. Restitution demands. All his. None escapable. It was financial judo. Using Jason's greed as the weapon. Making his theft fund the very thing he'd destroyed. Henry's legacy. Kindness replacing cruelty. Victor said the filings were ready. Waiting for my authorization. He said once Jason made his move, we'd make ours. Immediate. Irreversible. Devastating. I looked at the papers. At Henry's careful planning. At the trap built from love and foresight. I asked Victor what happened if Jason didn't file. What if he backed away? Disappeared. Gave up. Victor said the criminal investigation didn't need my permission. That was already in motion. Already unstoppable. But the civil filings, the asset transfers, those needed my signature. Those were my choice. I picked up the pen. Victor handed me the documents. I signed each page. My handwriting steady, clear. Authorization for asset transfer. Authorization for civil filings. Authorization to use Henry's final weapon. Samuel witnessed. Victor notarized. It was done. Samuel told me one more thing. He said Henry had hired him years ago. Given him specific instructions. If anything happened, if Jason moved against me, Samuel was to recover the watch. Deliver it personally. Make sure I understood what Henry had left me. Not just money. Not just evidence. Power. Choice. Protection. Samuel said Henry knew I was strong. That I'd know what to do. He said Henry bet everything on my strength. I thanked Samuel. My voice didn't waver. I thanked Victor. For continuing Henry's work. For protecting his plan. I left the office. The morning had turned bright. Warm. I drove past the hospital. The one Henry always loved. Children's Memorial. Where he'd volunteered. Where he'd donated before. The building was old. Needed renovation. Needed funding. Soon it would have both. Jason's theft would build therapy rooms. Buy medical equipment. Cruelty would become healing. Greed would fund hope. Henry had engineered it. I had authorized it. Together, even apart, we were still fighting. I drove home. I made lunch. Sandwich and tea. I ate slowly. Thinking about the videos. About Brianna's coaching. About Jason practicing lies in my kitchen. About how they'd measured my worth in furniture prices. I thought about Henry. Watching. Recording. Planning. Never telling me. Never burdening me. Just building walls. Leaving weapons. Trusting me to use them. The phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. A woman's voice. Professional. Cool. She said she was calling from Jason's attorney's office. She said they were preparing documents. They needed information. She asked about my medical history. My cognitive function. She asked if I'd seen a doctor recently. If I'd been evaluated. I told her I had nothing to say to her. I told her my attorney would contact them if necessary. She started to protest. To insist it was routine. I hung up. My heart was racing now. Finally, they were moving. Making their play. Exactly like Henry predicted. Exactly as planned. I called Victor. I told him about the call. He said he'd been expecting it. He said it was perfect. He said they'd just activated their own trap. By tomorrow, the filings would begin. The transfers would process. By tomorrow, Jason's world would collapse completely. and I would still be standing. Still in my house. Still in control. Still wearing Henry's watch on my wrist. I hung up. I sat at the table. The house was quiet. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Everything looked normal, ordinary, but underneath, everything had changed. The trap was closing. The plan was unfolding. And I was no longer afraid. I touched the watch. I felt Henry's presence. Not gone. Never gone. Just transformed. Into evidence. Into protection. Into justice. The watch ticked. The sun moved. And I waited for tomorrow. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow came with headlines. Not on the front page. But page 3. Local section. Real estate fraud investigation. Asset freezes. Elder financial abuse probe. No names. Not yet. But the details were specific enough. Ward Capital LLC. Shell companies. Predatory schemes targeting vulnerable adults. I read it twice. Standing in my kitchen. Coffee growing cold. The paper felt thin in my hands. Ordinary. But the words weren't ordinary. They were detonation. My phone started ringing before 8 in the morning. Neighbors. People from church. Old colleagues from the bank. Everyone wanted to know if I was all right. If I needed anything. If they could help. I thanked them. I told them I was fine. I didn't tell them I'd helped build the explosion. That I'd signed the papers. Authorized the filings. That I'd been waiting for this exact morning. Mrs. Patterson came to my door around 9. She brought muffins. Blueberry. Still warm. Wrapped in a clean towel. She told me she'd seen the news. She'd heard the whispers. She said she was sorry. Again. She said she should have known better. I invited her in. We sat at the kitchen table. She asked if it was really Jason. If he'd really done those things. I told her the truth. Simple. Direct. Yes. It was Jason. Yes. He'd done those things. And worse. Much worse than the papers would ever print. Mrs. Patterson's face crumpled. She said she couldn't imagine. She said he'd always seemed like such a good son. I told her that's how it works. Good manners hide terrible intentions. Concern becomes a costume. Love becomes leverage. We drank coffee. We ate her muffins. She told me Brianna had called her last week. Before the raid. Before the news. Brianna said she was worried about me. About my confusion. She said I was forgetting things. Making poor decisions. She asked Mrs. Patterson to document anything unusual. Anything that might help them protect me. Mrs. Patterson said she'd believed it. She'd written things down. Times I forgot to bring in the trash. Days I stayed inside. Normal things. Grief things. But Brianna made them sound dangerous. I told Mrs. Patterson it wasn't her fault. I said Brianna was skilled. Practiced. Professional at manipulation. I said a lot of people believed her. For a while. Mrs. Patterson left after an hour. She hugged me at the door. She said she'd set the record straight with everyone. She said she'd make sure people knew the truth. I thanked her. I closed the door. The house felt different now. Less isolated. Less under siege. Victor called at noon. His voice was calm. Satisfied. He said the filings had processed overnight. Everything was in motion. The asset transfers. The hospital donation. The civil suits. All under Jason's name. All irrevocable. He said Jason's attorneys had tried to stop it. Too late. He said they'd filed emergency motions. All denied. He said the judge had reviewed Henry's evidence. The recordings. The documents. The judge called it premeditated elder exploitation. Textbook fraud. Victor said Brianna had taken a deal already. Early that morning, she testified against Jason, gave them everything: names, dates, bank accounts, the complete scheme. She was saving herself, exactly like Henry predicted. Loyalty lasted until consequences arrived, then vanished. Jason was alone now. No wife, no attorneys willing to fight, no money to pay for defense, no assets to leverage. Everything frozen, everything exposed, everything collapsing. Victor said criminal charges would be filed within days: wire fraud, elder abuse, money laundering, conspiracy. Years in prison, maybe decades, depending on the plea. He asked how I felt. If I needed anything. I told him I felt tired, but steady. I told him I didn't need anything. Henry had left enough, not just money, strategy, protection, justice. We hung up. I sat at the table. The same table where Jason and Brianna had planned my future. Where they'd coached lies, rehearsed manipulation, counted my worth in dollars. Now it was just my table again. My kitchen, my house, my life. That afternoon, I went to the hospital. Children's Memorial, the one Henry loved. I asked for the director. A woman named Dr. Chen. She knew who I was. Victor had already contacted her. She took me to her office. Small, cramped, filled with photos. Children smiling, children healing, children alive. Dr. Chen told me about the donation. The Henry Ward Memorial Wing. She said it would fund renovations, new equipment, expanded therapy rooms. She said it would save lives, improve futures, bring hope. She asked if I wanted to see the plans. I said yes. She spread blueprints across her desk, pointed to sections: pediatric oncology, physical therapy, family consultation rooms, all bearing Henry's name, all built from Jason's cruelty. Theft transformed into healing, greed converted into care. Dr. Chen asked if Henry would have approved. I told her Henry planned it. Every detail, every dollar. I told her he knew exactly what would happen. He knew Jason would steal. Brianna would manipulate. They'd both destroy. And he'd built a trap that turned destruction into creation, that punished greed by funding generosity. Dr. Chen's eyes filled. She touched my hand. She said Henry must have loved me very much. I told her he did. In ways I'm still discovering. In evidence. In planning. In protection that lasted beyond death. I left the hospital as the sun started setting. The building looked old, tired, in need of help. Soon it would shine. Soon it would grow. Soon Henry's name would mean something permanent. Something good. I drove home. I made dinner. Chicken and rice. I ate slowly. The kitchen was quiet. Henry's chair empty. But not lonely anymore. Just empty. A space where someone loved me once. Someone who thought ahead. Who built walls. Who left weapons. Someone who knew I was stronger than I believed. The evening news played. I watched this time. The anchor mentioned the fraud case. The investigation expanding. Real estate developer facing federal charges. Wife cooperating with authorities. Still no names. But everyone would know soon. They'd talk. They'd speculate. They'd judge. Let them. I had nothing to hide. Nothing to be ashamed of. I'd fought back. I'd used the weapons Henry left me. I'd survived. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It was Lily, Jason's daughter, my granddaughter. She said she'd heard the news. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't known. Hadn't understood what was happening. She said Brianna told her I was sick. Confused. Dangerous to myself. She said she'd believed it. She'd stayed away. Now she knew the truth. Now she understood. She asked if she could see me. I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the screen. Lily was 28, an elementary school teacher, kind eyes like her grandfather. She'd stopped calling 6 months ago. Stopped visiting. I'd thought I'd lost her. Lost the last good piece of Jason. I texted back. I told her yes. Tomorrow afternoon. My house. The response came immediately. Thank you. I love you. I set the phone down. Something loosened in my chest. Not everything was lost. Not everyone believed the lies. Some bridges could be rebuilt. Some connections restored. I wound the watch. The ritual Henry taught me. Every evening. Beside dinner. Keeping time. Keeping faith. The mechanism clicked. Smooth. Reliable. Constant. Just like Henry. Just like his love. I thought about Jason. About where he was tonight. Probably in that dark house. Probably alone. Probably realizing what he'd lost. What he'd destroyed. Not just money. Not just freedom. His mother. His daughter. His humanity. I felt something then. Not pity. Not quite. Something closer to mourning. For the son who used to be. The boy who climbed in my lap. Who laughed. Who loved. That boy was gone. Had been gone for years. I'd been mourning a ghost. Fighting a stranger. Now the fighting was done. Now the truth was visible. Now I could breathe. The watch ticked on. The night deepened. And I sat there. In my kitchen. In my house. Still standing. Still here. Still strong. Just like Henry knew I would be. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Lily arrived the next afternoon. Exactly at 2. I heard her car in the driveway. A small sedan. Teacher's car. I opened the door before she knocked. She stood on the porch. Uncertain. Her hands clutching her purse. She had Henry's eyes. Dark. Thoughtful. Kind. She also had tears on her cheeks. Fresh. Still falling. I didn't say anything. I just opened my arms. She stepped forward. She collapsed into me. We stood there. On the porch. In the sunlight. She sobbed. I held her. The way I used to when she was small. When skinned knees were the worst pain she knew. After a while, we went inside. I made tea. We sat at the kitchen table. The afternoon light slanted through the windows. Lily wrapped her hands around her cup. She didn't drink. She told me she was sorry. That she should have called. Should have visited. She said Brianna told her I was declining. Losing my memory. Brianna said I'd forgotten Lily's birthday. Her graduation. Important things. Brianna said I was angry. Paranoid. Accusing people of stealing. She said it wasn't safe for Lily to visit alone. Lily believed her. Why wouldn't she? Brianna was her stepmother. Family. I told Lily I understood. I said manipulation works because it sounds reasonable. I said Brianna was skilled. That she'd fooled many people. Not just her. Lily asked what really happened. What her father had done. I told her the truth. Not all of it, but enough. The gambling debts. The scheme to control my assets. The recordings. The plan to have me declared incompetent. To sell my house. The lies seeded with neighbors. The attorneys. The nursing home threats. Lily's face went pale. Her hands shook. She said she'd had no idea. No sense of it at all. She said her father seemed stressed. But she'd thought it was work. She'd thought he was worried about me. About losing his father. She'd thought he was being a good son. I told her that's what he wanted everyone to think. I said good people can become unrecognizable. That desperation changes people. That sometimes love isn't enough to save someone from themselves. Lily asked about the watch. About why it mattered so much. I showed her. I took it off my wrist. I pressed the hidden catch. The first compartment opened. Empty now. I pressed again. The second catch. The micro SD card was gone too. But the mechanism remained. The proof of Henry's planning. Lily held the watch. She turned it over. Her fingers gentle. She said Grandpa Henry wore this every day. She remembered. She said he'd wind it at breakfast. Always beside his coffee. She said it was like a promise he kept. Every single morning. I told her that's exactly what it was. A promise. To remember. To protect. To fight when fighting was necessary. I said Henry knew Jason was in trouble. Years before I did. He'd prepared for the worst. While hoping for better. He'd built walls. Left weapons. Trusted me to use them. Lily asked if I hated her father now. I thought about that. About hate. About what I actually felt. I told her no. I said I mourned him instead. Mourned the boy he'd been. The man he could have been. I said hate requires energy I didn't have. Didn't want. I said I'd used my energy for survival. For justice. For truth. Now I was using it for living. For rebuilding. For peace. Lily cried again. Quieter this time. I held her hand across the table. She asked if I could forgive her for staying away. I told her there was nothing to forgive. She'd been lied to. I said what mattered now was that she was here. That she'd chosen to come. To ask. To listen. That took courage. That took love. We talked for 2 hours. About her teaching job. Her students. Her life. She told me about a little boy who struggled with reading. How she'd stayed after school helping him. How he'd finally broken through. How his face had lit up when the words made sense. She said that moment made everything worth it. All the hard days. The frustration. I told her she sounded like her grandfather. He'd loved teaching too. Not in schools. But with numbers. With spreadsheets. With patience. Lily smiled. First real smile since she'd arrived. She said she missed him. She said she wished he was here. I told her he was. In ways that mattered. In ways that lasted. Before she left, Lily asked if she could visit again. I told her yes. Anytime. My door was always open. She hugged me at the door. Tighter this time. Longer. She said she loved me. She said she'd never believe lies again. I told her to be careful with always and never. I said life was more complicated than absolute promises. I said just come back. That was enough. I watched her drive away. Her car disappearing down the street. Something had been returned to me. Something I'd thought was lost. Not everything. Not Jason. But Lily. Connection. Family that chose truth. That evening, Victor called. His voice was different. Heavier. He said Jason had been formally charged. Federal courthouse. That afternoon. Wire fraud. Elder financial exploitation. Conspiracy. Money laundering. Bail was denied. Flight risk. Pattern of deception. Jason would stay in custody until trial. Months. Maybe a year. Victor said Brianna's testimony had been devastating. Complete cooperation. She'd given them everything. Bank accounts. Communications. The full conspiracy. She'd also filed for divorce. Emergency petition. Citing fraud and deception. She was walking away. Clean. Protected by her betrayal. Victor asked if I wanted to know where Jason was being held. If I wanted to visit. To say anything. I said no. I had nothing to say to him. Nothing that would change anything. Nothing that would heal anything. I said some bridges burn completely. Some relationships end in ash. This was one of them. Victor said he understood. He said the civil cases would proceed separately. Restitution, asset recovery, final accounting. He said it would take time. But justice was moving. Inevitable now. I thanked him. For everything. For seeing Henry's plan through. For protecting me when I didn't know I needed protection. He said it was his honor. That Henry had been a good man. That good men deserved loyalty. Even after death. We hung up. I sat in the living room. The light fading outside. I thought about Jason. About him sitting in a cell tonight. About what he was thinking. Feeling. Regretting. I wondered if he understood yet. If he saw what he'd destroyed. Not just his freedom. Not just his marriage. His mother. His daughter. His father's respect. His own humanity. I wondered if he blamed me. If he thought I'd been cruel. If he understood that cruelty was what he'd practiced on me. That I'd simply refused to be the victim he needed. I felt tired. Bone tired. The kind sleep doesn't fix. But I also felt something else. Something unexpected. Relief. The kind that comes from surviving. From standing when others fall. From using strength you didn't know you possessed. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went through old photo albums. Henry and me. Jason as a child. Lily as a baby. Birthday parties. Holidays. Normal moments. The people in those pictures looked happy. Maybe they were. Maybe happiness was real then. Before money poisoned everything. Before gambling devoured Jason's judgment. Before Brianna arrived. I closed the albums. I put them back on the shelf. The past was the past. Beautiful. Painful. Finished. The present was mine. The future was open. I wound the watch. The evening ritual. Henry's gift. The mechanism clicked. Steady. Reliable. Enduring. I thought about the hospital wing. About children who would heal there. About therapy rooms and equipment bought with Jason's theft. About how Henry had turned poison into medicine. Cruelty into care. About how love doesn't always look gentle. Sometimes it looks like strategy. Sometimes it looks like evidence. Like preparation. Like war. I went to bed. The watch on my nightstand. Ticking through the darkness. Tomorrow would bring more news. More consequences. More unfolding. But tonight, I was safe. I was strong. I was here. And Henry's promise was kept. Still keeping. Still protecting. Even now. Even still. Even always. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Summer arrived 3 months later. The kind of summer Henry loved. Warm mornings. Long evenings. Garden weather. I stood in front of Children's Memorial Hospital. The building gleamed. Fresh paint. New windows. Construction scaffolding finally gone. The dedication ceremony was scheduled for 10 o'clock. People gathered on the lawn. Doctors. Nurses. Families. Donors. Children in wheelchairs. Children with IVs. Children laughing despite everything. Dr. Chen found me in the crowd. She touched my arm gently. She said they were ready. She asked if I was ready too. I nodded. My throat tight. My hands steady. We walked to the podium together. The crowd quieted. Dr. Chen spoke first. She talked about the renovation. The new equipment. The therapy rooms. The family spaces. The hope being built. She said one man's vision had made it possible. Henry Ward. She said his wife had ensured that vision became reality. Then she gestured to the building. To the new entrance. Above the doors, a bronze plaque caught the sunlight. The Henry Ward Memorial Wing. People applauded. I stared at his name. At those letters in metal. Permanent, lasting, meaningful. Dr. Chen invited me to speak. I hadn't prepared anything. I walked to the podium. I looked at the faces watching me. I told them Henry wore a Rolex every day. For 43 years. He wound it at dawn. Beside his coffee. A quiet ritual. People didn't understand why that watch mattered so much to him. I said I hadn't understood either. Not fully. Not until after. The watch wasn't about showing off. It was about keeping time. About keeping promises. About protecting what mattered most. I told them Henry knew the world could be cruel. That people could change. That even family could become predators when desperation took hold. So he prepared. He built walls. He left weapons. He planned for war. But he also planned for this. For healing. For hope. For children. I said the money funding this wing came from theft. From greed. From cruelty. But Henry transformed it. Turned poison into medicine. Destruction into creation. I said that's what love does when it's strategic. When it thinks ahead. When it protects even after death. My voice cracked. Just once. I steadied it. I said this building would save lives. Would heal bodies. Would restore futures. And every child who walked through those doors would benefit from Henry's foresight. From his refusal to let evil win completely. From his stubborn, careful love. I thanked them. I stepped back. The applause felt distant. Underwater. Dr. Chen hugged me. Lily was there too. She'd driven in from the city. She held my hand as we toured the new wing. The walls were painted soft colors. Blues. Greens. Calming. The therapy rooms had windows. Natural light. Views of trees. The equipment was modern. Digital. Life-saving. Children moved through the halls. Some slow. Some tired. All alive. We stopped in the family consultation room. Comfortable chairs. Tissues. Privacy. This was where doctors delivered hard news. Where families made impossible decisions. Where hope and grief sat side by side. Lily told me this room would change lives too. In quieter ways. She said having a beautiful space for hard conversations mattered. That dignity in suffering made suffering more bearable. I thought about Henry. About his careful planning. His thorough vision. He'd thought of this. All of it. Every detail. Every impact. We left the hospital around noon. The sun high and bright. Lily took me to lunch. A small cafe near the lake. We sat outside. The water sparkled. Sailboats drifted past. Lily told me about her summer plans. Teaching summer school. Helping struggling readers. She said one of her students had made 2 grade levels of progress. She said watching children discover they could learn was magic. Pure magic. I told her she was like Henry that way. Patient. Persistent. Believing in people. She smiled. She said she hoped so. She said she tried. She asked about me. About how I was really doing. I told her the truth. That some days were hard. That grief was complicated. That I missed Henry every morning. Every evening. Every moment between. But I also felt him present. In the watch. In the plan. In the protection. In the way he'd loved me enough to prepare for the worst. Lily asked if I'd heard anything about her father. I said no. I said I'd asked Victor not to update me. I said that chapter was closed. That I needed it closed. Lily nodded. She understood. She said she hadn't visited him either. She said she didn't know how to reconcile the father she remembered with the man he'd become. I told her that was okay. That some questions don't have answers. That sometimes we just have to live with not knowing. With not understanding. After lunch, Lily drove me home. She came inside. We had coffee. She asked if she could take some of Grandpa Henry's things. Photos. His old calculator. A coffee mug he'd used for decades. I said yes. I helped her gather them. We wrapped them carefully. She said she wanted reminders. Things she could touch. Things that lasted. I gave her the photo albums too. The ones with Jason as a child. I said she should have them. Should remember when things were different. Should know her father had been loved once. Before everything broke. Lily cried when she left. But different tears. Grateful tears. She said she'd come back next weekend. And the weekend after. She said she wouldn't disappear again. That she'd learned that lesson. I waved as she drove away. The afternoon sun warming my face. I went inside. The house felt quiet. But not lonely. Not anymore. I'd joined a book club. Mrs. Patterson had invited me. 3 weeks ago. We met on Thursdays. We discussed novels, drank tea, laughed sometimes. The women were kind, direct. They didn't tolerate bullies or gossip. They'd welcomed me back into the neighborhood, into community, into life. I'd also started volunteering at the hospital. 2 mornings a week. I shelved picture books in the children's library. Read to the young ones. The kids didn't care about market cycles or investment returns. Just stories. Just someone who showed up. Who smiled. Who stayed. That evening, I sat on the porch. The sun setting over the lake. The watch was on my wrist. I wound it without thinking. The habit was mine now. Not just Henry's. Ours. I thought about Jason. About where he was. What he was facing. Victor had told me once, months ago, that the trial would come eventually. That justice was slow but certain. That consequences were real. I didn't need to know more than that. I didn't need to witness it. I'd fought my battle. I'd survived. I'd rebuilt. That was enough. I thought about Brianna. About her testimony. Her betrayal of Jason. About how she'd walked away clean. Unpunished. Free. I wondered if she slept well at night. If she felt guilty at all. Then I decided it didn't matter. She was gone from my life. Completely. Some people aren't worth the energy of anger. Or forgiveness. Or thought. The sky turned pink. Then orange. Then purple. Finally dark. Stars appeared. One by one. Constant. Reliable. There. I thought about Henry's final gift. Not the money. Not the evidence. The gift of knowing I was stronger than I believed. That I could fight. That I could survive. That I could stand alone. He'd given me that knowledge. That certainty. That power. By trusting me with weapons. By believing I'd know when to use them. By loving me enough to prepare for war while hoping for peace. The watch ticked on my wrist. Steady. Patient. Relentless. I went inside. I locked the door. I turned off the lights. I climbed into bed. Henry's side still empty. Still his. But I was okay. More than okay. I was whole. Not the same as before. Changed. Scarred. Rebuilt. But whole in a new way. Stronger. Wiser. Freer. The watch sat on my nightstand. Ticking through the darkness. Keeping time. Keeping promises. Keeping me safe. Just like Henry always had. Just like he always would. Even now. Even gone. Even forever. The watch that fought back had done its job. Had kept me protected. And I'd done mine. I'd survived. I'd honored Henry's plan, his love, his legacy. I closed my eyes. The ticking faded. Sleep came. Deep. Peaceful. Earned. Tomorrow would bring another morning. Another day. Another chance. But tonight, I rested. Safe. Strong. Still here. Still wearing Henry's watch. Still keeping time. Still keeping faith. The greatest love I'd ever known hadn't arrived with roses or poems. It arrived with backups. With binders. With hidden compartments and careful planning. With a second latch you could only find if you cared enough to look. The watch ticked on. Stubborn. Steady. True. And I smiled in the darkness. Because I understood finally. Completely. The thing they'd tried to steal had already done its job. It had kept me safe. Had kept me fighting. Had kept me whole. Henry's last gift. Henry's best gift. Henry's forever gift. Time. Truth. Protection.